To the next installment in my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to take a look at absolute versus comparative advantage. And this relates to our discussion of the production possibilities frontier. And this is particularly important because students oftentimes get these two concepts confused. And this is the reason why I thought producing a video about this would be beneficial to the students taking any of my courses that relate to the production possibilities frontier. As always, I like to provide appropriate attribution to anything I use in this particular video or any of my videos. So anytime you see anything in quotes in this particular video, it comes from Principles of Microeconomics by Case, Fair, and Oster from Pearson Publishing, in particular the 12th edition of that particular textbook. So absolute advantage, the definition from the textbook is a producer has an absolute advantage over another in the production of a good or service if they can produce that product using fewer resources, that is, at a lower absolute per unit cost. So if it's less costly for the individual to produce that particular item, the individual or firm to produce that item relative to another firm, they have the absolute advantage in the production of that particular good or service. Comparative advantage, on the other hand, is a producer has a comparative advantage over another in the production of a good or service if they can produce that product at a lower opportunity cost. So that's the key distinction here, is that with comparative advantage, we're looking at lower opportunity cost. So to summarize that, realizing that absolute advantage entails producing at a lower unit cost, per unit cost, while comparative advantage entails producing at a lower opportunity cost. So I think it would be useful to take a look at this graphically to illustrate this point, as this might be helpful for students. So here we're assuming that this individual, Mo, you can see the production possibilities frontier for Mo, and during any particular day, if Mo were to spend all of his time making pizza, he could make 14 pizzas in a day. And if Mo were to spend all of his time producing beer, Mo could produce 6 beers in a given day. So I've just illustrated the PPF for these two extreme ends. One, using his time and resources exclusively to make pizza, so 14 pizzas in a given day when that's all Mo is producing. And 6 beers per day for Mo when he spends all of his time producing beer. Now we have to compare this to another individual, and here we have the production possibilities frontier for Curly. If Curly spends the entire day producing pizza, he can produce 10 pizzas, and if he spends all of his time producing beer, he can produce 2 beers in a given day. So if we take a look at this, and we see that Mo is more efficient at producing pizza and beer relative to Curly, as evidenced by the fact that Mo can produce 14 in a day when he's exclusively producing pizza, while Curly can only produce 10 pizzas a day when exclusively producing pizza. So Mo has the absolute advantage in pizza production. And if we take a look at beer, Mo can produce 6 beers per day when he's exclusively producing beer, while Curly can only produce 2 pizzas per day when exclusively producing beer. So graphically, we can see here that Mo has the absolute advantage in both beer and pizza production. He's been able to produce those at a lower per unit cost. So if we want to take a look at this, for example, if Curly wanted to produce 14 pizzas, he would need more than one day in order to do that. So Mo has the absolute advantage in pizza production. And if Curly wanted to produce the same amount of beer as Mo, it would take him 3 days to produce what Mo can produce in one day. So Mo has the advantage in beer production. Now I'm going to bring up another slide that changes the production possibilities frontier for Curly to further illustrate this issue. Now, if we take a look at this, we can see that, again, if Mo spends all of his time producing pizza, in one day he can produce 14 units of pizza, while Curly can only produce 10. So Mo still has the absolute advantage in pizza production. And with this new production possibilities frontier, we can see that Curly can produce 8 beers in a day, where when he spends all of his time producing beer, when Mo can only produce 6 beers in a given day when he spends all of his time producing beer. So Curly has the absolute advantage in beer production. So realize that from a graphical perspective, the absolute advantage can be determined by who can produce more in a given time period. In this instance, Mo produces more pizza per day than Curly, so he has the absolute advantage in pizza production. And in a given day, Curly can produce 8 beers compared to 6 for Mo. Therefore, Curly has the absolute advantage in beer production. So let's contrast this to how we take a look at comparative advantage. We need to calculate the opportunity cost of production of a particular output relative to the other output that the individual can produce. So for Mo can produce 14 pizzas in a day, and by doing this, Mo gives up 7 beers. So what you can do is look at the extreme ends of the production possibilities frontier and equate them to one another. So for Mo, he can produce 14 pizzas in a day or 7 beers in a day. If we want to know what the opportunity cost of pizza is, we just bring that down to 1 unit. So Mo can produce 14 pizzas. We divide by 14. We divide both sides by 14. So we know that 1 pizza is the opportunity cost of producing 1 pizza is half a beer for Mo. We do the same thing for Curly. Curly can produce 10 pizzas in a given day, and in doing that, Curly foregoes 2 beers. So the opportunity cost of 10 pizzas is equal to 2 beers. Again, if we want to know what the opportunity cost of producing a pizza for Curly is, we divide both sides by 10 so that we get 1 pizza is equivalent to 0.2 beers. So the opportunity cost for Curly of producing a pizza is 0.2 beers, while the opportunity cost of Mo producing a pizza is 0.5 beers. Therefore, Curly has the comparative advantage in pizza production. I hope this was helpful to you. As I stated at the very beginning, confusing absolute and comparative advantage is something, I don't want to say it's quite common, but it's something that some students have a tendency of getting confusing. And it's very important to be able to distinguish between absolute and comparative advantage in economics. So we can continue here. We can take a look at, let's say we want to determine what the absolute advantage, the comparative advantage is and the opportunity cost in beer instead of pizza. So again, Mo can produce 14 pizzas, and in producing 14 pizzas in a day, Mo foregoes producing 7 beers. So if we want to determine what the opportunity cost of beer production is for Mo, we divide by 7 so that we get 1 beer. We divide both sides by 7, and we get that 1 beer is the equivalent to 2 pizzas. We do the same thing for Curly. Curly can produce 10 beers in a given day. Sorry about that. I lost connection with my mouse. Unfortunately, it's a design flaw with this particular mouse that sometimes it kicks out if you accidentally hit it a little bit too hard. So let me start that again. So Curly can produce 10 pizzas in a day, and the opportunity cost of doing that is equal to 2 beers. He can produce 10 pizzas, and in the same time he would have been able to produce 2 beers. We want to know what the opportunity cost of a beer is, so we divide both sides by 2. So we get that 1 beer is equal to 5 pizzas. So Mo has the comparative advantage in beer production because the opportunity cost for Mo of producing a beer is 2 pizzas compared to 5 pizzas for Curly. So again, I hope this is helpful to you. Make sure you understand the difference between absolute and comparative advantage. As I stated multiple times, this is, some students get confused on this and don't understand the difference. They think that absolute and comparative advantage are the same thing. They are not.